The truth you're about to hear isn't a story meant for comfort or distraction. It's a secret so dark, so utterly grotesque, that it has been buried beneath layers of silence, deception, and fear like those empty coffins in a forgotten graveyard. Imagine a church, a place supposed to be sacred, where death itself was weaponized to manipulate and control, where souls were not laid to rest but sold into a shadowy underworld. This is the story of 357 victims in 5 years, men who vanished behind the stained glass of faith, their bodies replaced by stones, their lives stripped to mere currency. Section 1. In the winter of 1879, when authorities finally cracked open the graves behind St. Stephen's Church in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, what they found shattered every illusion of sanctity. Of 157 coffins buried over 12 years, not a single one held human remains. Instead, each coffin contained carefully arranged stones weighted to match the supposed deceased. A cruel, hollow ruse to deceive grieving families and a society desperate for order. Church records revealed insurance payouts totaling over $300,000, an astronomical fortune in that era paid out for bodies that never truly died. Who were these men? What hell had they been dragged into? And how did a place of worship become the epicenter of one of the most chilling conspiracies in American history? Tonight, we descend into the shadows of Millbrook's coalfields, revealing the systematic corruption, psychological manipulation, and brutal exploitation hidden beneath the surface of this grim deception. This is not just a tale of greed, but a profound betrayal of trust, a dark chapter that challenges everything you believe about faith, power, and the human soul. Prepare yourself. The truth is more dangerous than you think. This is knowledge that changes a man forever. This is the church that buried empty coffins. Section 2. Millbrook, Pennsylvania, 1867. A town carved from coal dust and sweat, nestled in the bleak valleys of Schuylkill County. Nearly 3,000 souls lived and died here, mostly Welsh and Irish immigrants lured by the promise of prosperity in America's booming coal industry. The town's heartbeat was the mine's ruthless, unforgiving places that swallowed men whole with deadly cave-ins, explosions, and the creeping black lung disease. Amid this relentless hardship, St. Stephen's Episcopal Church stood quietly on Elm Street, its modest brick facade a stark contrast to the ornate Catholic cathedrals nearby. It served a Protestant congregation of English and German families, many isolated and lacking the strong community networks that their Catholic neighbors relied on. In this isolation, desperation festered, widows found themselves alone, children orphaned without support, and minors faced death without dignity or security. Enter Reverend Marcus Thompson, a tall man with silver hair and piercing pale eyes, whose arrival in early 1867 would set the wheels of this dark conspiracy in motion. Thompson was not just a man of God. He was a master of influence and deception, armed with impeccable credentials and a silver tongue that promised salvation both spiritual and material. Within months, he introduced a revolutionary church-sponsored life insurance program, a seemingly miraculous lifeline offering widows immediate payouts and families a shield against poverty. But this lifeline was a noose disguised as hope. Behind its comforting promise lurked a sinister mechanism, one that preyed on the community's deepest fears and vulnerabilities. Thompson's program created a network of control, binding the desperate to a fate darker than death itself. It was a system built on trust, faith, and the cruel exploitation of human suffering. Now, as you watch this, ask yourself, how far would you go to protect your family? How easily could faith be twisted into a tool for bondage? The story of St. Stephen's is a warning the deepest darkness often hides behind the brightest light. Section 3. Reverend Thompson's life insurance program was a masterstroke of manipulation. For just 50 cents a month, less than the price of a loaf of bread, miners could insure their lives for $500, nearly 2 years' wages. Families were promised immediate payouts upon death certificates, with Thompson himself personally guaranteeing the process. No questions asked, no delays. Relief came quickly, and with it, a heavy price few could foresee. Dr. Cornelius Whitman, the town's young and ambitious physician, became Thompson's willing accomplice. With a practiced smile and a medical license, Whitman identified the sick, the injured, the doomed. His office became a screening chamber, where minors with black lung or crippling injuries were quietly marked for transition. Death certificates were signed, diagnoses manipulated, and a cruel choice offered: die in poverty, or accept a fabricated death and a chance at a grim new life. Samuel Crowe, the undertaker and sexton, perfected the illusion. Using sawdust, stones, and rags, he crafted convincing corpses to fill coffins. Funeral services became elaborate performances, designed to overwhelm the senses, to drown suspicion in grief and prayer. Families were assured the departed had found peace, even as the truth grew darker beneath the surface. This triad of spiritual authority, medical complicity, and funeral craft formed an unbreakable chain, a mechanism that converted living men into missing ghosts, their absence rationalized by faith, their silence bought with money. What began as a desperate gamble for survival spiraled into a systematic trade in human lives. Men were declared dead and buried, not in earth, but in shadows, their fates sealed in the dark, suffocating tunnels of illegal mining operations far from home. Section 4. The first cracks in the facade appeared in whispers. Thomas McKenna, a miner, swore he saw his friend James Morrison walking the railroad tracks weeks after Morrison's funeral. Others reported similar sightings, ghostly figures glimpsed in distant towns, thinner, worn, unresponsive. Grief-stricken families clung to these visions, desperate for hope, while the church explained them away as manifestations of sorrow and faith. But the truth was more brutal. Morrison and others were not ghosts. They were prisoners. Transported in chains to isolated mines in western Pennsylvania, they lived under assumed names, forced into labor until death claimed them for real. Their deaths were fabricated to free them for exploitation, a hideous form of slavery cloaked in religion and deception. These mining operations were brutal beyond comprehension. No safety measures, no concern for human life, only profit. Men worked 12 to 16-hour shifts in suffocating tunnels, facing constant danger. Food was meager, medical care non-existent, and hope extinguished. Those who survived became shadows of themselves, broken bodies, shattered spirits, erased identities. This was the Millbrook Method, a ruthless system converting tragedy into profit, despair into control. Reverend Thompson's sermons preached sacrifice and divine providence, while families wept over empty coffins, blind to the human trafficking under their noses. The church became a marketplace for souls, a sinister engine grinding lives into coal dust. Section 5. Now, I want you to take a moment. Look deep into your own sense of trust in institutions, in faith, in the narratives you've been told all your life. Because understanding this truth requires more than facts. It demands awakening. Repeat after me, out loud or in your mind, the phrase that unlocks awareness. I see through the shadow. Say it twice. I see through the shadow. I see through the shadow. Only those willing to confront the darkness can break free from its grip. The Millbrook Method thrived because it exploited not just bodies, but minds, shaping belief, manufacturing consent, silencing doubt with ritual and fear. Reverend Thompson understood psychology intimately. He never targeted the strong, only the desperate, the isolated, the vulnerable. His strategy was precise. Identify minors too sick or injured to continue, offer them a Christian solution to their plight, then erase them from their lives and identities. Dr. Whitman's medical exams became brutal screenings for who could be sacrificed. Samuel Crowe's staged funerals masked the disappearances, and Thompson's promises ensured the community's compliance, a pact forged in fear and false hope. This was institutionalized psychological control, a system that weaponized faith to suppress questioning and maintain power. Families too broken by grief to resist, communities too isolated to investigate, authorities too complicit or indifferent to intervene. The perfect conspiracy hiding in plain sight. Section 6. The more you peel back the layers of this horror, the clearer it becomes. This was never just a local scandal or a tragic accident. It was a meticulously engineered system of oppression, designed to feed a machine far larger and more merciless than any one church or town. The Millbrook Method was the blueprint for how institutions could manipulate despair, bend faith, and manufacture obedience, turning human life into a disposable commodity. Think about the implications. A trusted spiritual leader orchestrates the disappearance of hundreds, exploiting grief to conceal mass enslavement. A doctor who swore to heal becomes a gatekeeper of death, certifying false ends to begin new, brutal lives underground. An undertaker, once a figure of respect, becomes an artist of deception, creating phantoms in coffins to pacify a grieving town. Together, they crafted a closed loop of control, wrapped in the sacred language of salvation and sacrifice. But this was not happenstance. Reverend Thompson was a master of psychological warfare. His sermons, dripping with authority and compassion, manipulated the rawest human emotions: fear, hope, despair, binding his flock into a web where questioning equaled betrayal. His church insurance program was less about protection and more about ensnaring souls, offering a false promise of security in exchange for compliance. This manipulation extended beyond the individual victims. It invaded entire families, communities, and generations. Widows received payouts that came at the cost of never truly knowing their husband's fate. Children grew up with the hollow grief of loss, while their fathers lived hidden lives of torment. The system depended on this silence, the perfect crime committed under the veil of faith. And as the coal mines grew darker and more lethal, the demand for expendable labor intensified. Millbrook was not unique. It was a microcosm of a brutal industrial underworld that thrived on human suffering and invisibility. The Millbrook method was the dark mirror reflecting how power exploits vulnerability, a lesson that echoes through history, still relevant in today's world. Ask yourself, how many systems around you operate with the same cold logic? How many institutions wield their influence to control, deceive, and consume? The truth is not just history, it's a warning. Section 7. Behind closed doors, this system grew bolder. The network expanded beyond Millbrook, reaching into the surrounding counties and deeper into the industrial heart of Pennsylvania. The initial 157 empty coffins were just the beginning. By the end of 5 years, the death toll, both real and fabricated, had climbed to 357. Reverend Thompson's methods became a dark art, refined to perfection. He cultivated informants within the mines who would alert him to vulnerable workers, those sick, injured, or drowning in debt. Families who resisted or questioned were quietly ostracized or subjected to intense pressure from the church elders, branded as heretics or unbelievers. Meanwhile, Dr. Whitman's medical examinations morphed into a ruthless screening protocol. Each report meticulously documented physical decline, financial desperation, and social isolation criteria that determined who would be reassigned. This clinical coldness erased any pretense of care. Medicine was weaponized to facilitate human trafficking. Samuel Crow's coffins became a grotesque symbol of this conspiracy: silent tombs filled with stones, an echoing void that screamed the absence of truth. The churchyard was a cemetery of lies, where grief was commodified and death's sanctity profaned. But the true horror lay in the fate of the men themselves. Transported in secret, often shackled, to remote mining camps, they entered a living hell. Forced into backbreaking labor under brutal overseers, these men were trapped in a nightmare with no escape. Communication with their families was impossible. Their identities erased, their spirits crushed. This systematic erasure of identity was a form of psychological annihilation, a calculated method to break resistance and ensure absolute control. The men were no longer individuals but assets, commodities to be traded, expended, and discarded. Their stories were silenced, their existence denied. And while the church preached salvation from the pulpit, it orchestrated damnation in the shadows. The duality was not accidental but fundamental. The sanctity of faith was weaponized to mask profound corruption. Section 8. By now, you might be asking, how did this go unnoticed for so long? How did an entire community, including law enforcement and local officials, remain blind or worse, complicit? The answer lies in the power of institutional manipulation and social control. Reverend Thompson was not just a pastor. He was a local authority, a gatekeeper who commanded respect and fear. His position allowed him to shape narratives, silence dissent, and coordinate a network of enablers. Insurance companies, hungry for profit and eager to penetrate the minor population, turned a blind eye. Keystone Mutual Assurance, the company behind the church-sponsored life insurance, pocketed massive sums without auditing claims rigorously. The records were clean on paper, death certificates signed, coffins buried, payouts made, but the truth remained hidden. Families, devastated by loss, rarely questioned official reports. Thompson's sermons preached acceptance and divine providence, framing death and sacrifice as holy duties. The emotional weight of grief suppressed suspicion. No one wanted to confront the possibility that their church was a front for trafficking their loved ones into slavery. Local authorities were either unaware or unwilling to investigate. Corruption, intimidation, and bureaucratic inertia played roles. Some suspected irregularities but lacked evidence or the courage to challenge a powerful religious figure. Fear of scandal kept many silent. The church's influence was a shield protecting the conspiracy from scrutiny. This was the anatomy of institutional betrayal, where power cloaked itself in legitimacy, where truth was a threat to the system's survival, and where the most vulnerable were sacrificed to maintain order. Section 9. Before we move deeper into this abyss, I need you to anchor yourself in this truth. Repeat the phrase that binds awareness. I walk through darkness to find light. Say it twice. Let it settle into your mind. I walk through darkness to find light. I walk through darkness to find light. This isn't just a story. It's a call to see beyond illusions. The shadows you face here are reflections of those in every corner of society. The mechanisms that enabled the Millbrook method, fear, isolation, control, are alive today in different forms, often masked as protection or tradition. Remember, knowledge is power, but only if you use it. To understand the Millbrook method is to glimpse how easy it is for darkness to hide behind sanctity, how trust can be twisted into chains. It challenges the very foundations of faith and authority, and it demands vigilance. Section 10. Back in Millbrook, the human cost escalated. Families destroyed, lives stolen, communities shattered. The consequences of this conspiracy reached far beyond the churchyard. Widows left alone, never knowing the truth. Children growing up with haunting questions. Men trapped in endless labor, their suffering invisible. But even as the horror unfolded, some began to resist. Small acts of defiance appeared, whispers shared between neighbors, suspicious glances exchanged at funerals, rumors circulating quietly in the shadows. A miner's wife, a preacher's assistant, a skeptical doctor from a neighboring town, these were sparks of rebellion against the machine of silence. Yet the price of resistance was high. Those who dared question found themselves isolated, threatened, or disappeared. The church's grip tightened, employing fear and intimidation to maintain its dominion. This was psychological warfare at its most ruthless, a battle not just for lives but for minds and souls. Through this, the Millbrook method revealed its true nature. Not merely a crime of greed, but an exercise in power, absolute, ruthless, and unchallenged. Section 11. The twisted architecture of the Millbrook method was more than a local tragedy. It was a blueprint for psychological domination cloaked in sanctity. Reverend Thompson's sermons were not merely calls for faith, they were instruments of control, finely tuned to manipulate the most primal human fears: loss, abandonment, and the desperate need for hope. He preached sacrifice as a noble duty, convincing grieving families that their suffering was part of a divine plan. This was not just spiritual counsel, it was a calculated psychological operation. By framing the disappearance of their loved ones as a sacred sacrifice, Thompson redirected anger into submission, doubt into faith. The church insurance program became a tool of obedience. Families who accepted payouts were complicit, caught in a web where financial relief was exchanged for silence. The emotional trauma was weaponized. Guilt and grief became chains binding survivors to the conspiracy. This manipulation was systemic, woven into every layer of community life. Children learned to fear questioning elders. Neighbors watched silently, paralyzed by uncertainty and mistrust. The church was no longer a place of refuge, it was a fortress of psychological control, built on fear and deception. Behind closed doors, Thompson and his accomplices monitored their victims' progress. Reports flowed back from the remote mines. Broken bodies, lost spirits, disappearing men. Yet to the public, the facade remained pristine, faithful sermons, solemn funerals, and the illusion of divine providence. This duality, light masking darkness, is the essence of power in its most insidious form. It teaches a brutal lesson. Those who control the narrative control reality itself. Section 12. By 1872, the Millbrook method was a well-oiled machine. Reverend Thompson's influence extended beyond the pulpit. He had become a shadow overlord, a man who ruled lives and deaths with chilling precision. His partnership with Dr. Whitman and Undertaker Samuel Crowe was the engine driving a cycle of exploitation cloaked in sanctity. Yet even with their ruthless efficiency, cracks began to form. Rumors of missing men spread beyond Millbrook. Families desperate for answers reached out to journalists, local officials, and reformers, but were met with bureaucratic stonewalling and veiled threats. One brave journalist, Anna Blackwood, began to dig into the mystery. Her reports hinted at a conspiracy that reached into church hierarchies and insurance companies. But she was quickly silenced. Her articles disappeared, her reputation smeared, and her safety threatened. The conspiracy had teeth. It protected itself by crushing dissent and controlling information. The church's power extended into political spheres, ensuring that investigations were stalled or derailed. This was institutional corruption at its peak, a fortress built from silence and fear. Yet the truth could not be buried forever. Whispers of the Millbrook method began to seep into the wider world, a shadowy stain spreading over the sacred institutions that had betrayed their own. The stage was set for a reckoning, one that would expose the fragile line between faith and manipulation. Section 13. Now take a moment and breathe this in. The knowledge you carry is dangerous, transformative. Speak these words, aloud or in your mind. I am the light in the abyss. Repeat it twice. I am the light in the abyss. I am the light in the abyss. This phrase is a key, unlocking the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. The story of St. Stephen's is not just history. It's a mirror reflecting the ongoing battle between power and truth, between control and freedom. The Millbrook method shows how easily institutions can betray their highest callings. It reveals the cost when faith is weaponized and how deeply corruption can root itself in the soil of trust. But it also reveals something more profound: the resilience of human spirit. Even in the darkest places, light fights to break through. Awareness is the first step toward liberation. Section 14. The final unraveling came in 1879, when mounting pressure forced authorities to act. Grave robbers, hired by insurance investigators suspicious of the unusual number of claims, exhumed coffins at St. Stephen's. What they found sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. Empty coffins filled with stones, no bodies, no remains. The scandal exploded, shaking the foundations of church, insurance, and industry. Reverend Thompson disappeared, his fate unknown. Some say he fled. Others whisper darker ends. Dr. Whitman and Samuel Crowe faced investigations, but the full extent of their complicity remained murky. The victims' families were left with shattered faith and unanswered questions. The churchyard became a symbol of betrayal, a graveyard of lies. The Millbrook method was exposed, but the damage was irreversible. This episode left a scar on American history, a reminder that beneath the veneer of civilization lies a capacity for darkness, a truth that echoes in power structures to this day. Section 15. Now you stand at the edge of this abyss, knowing a truth few dare to face. The church that buried empty coffins was not just a historical horror. It is a lesson in vigilance, a warning against blind faith in authority. You have been taken down the rabbit hole, shown the mechanisms of deception, the faces behind the masks, the human cost of institutional corruption. This knowledge is a burden and a gift. The real power lies in what you do next. Will you remain a passive witness, or will you become the light that exposes shadows? The secrets of Millbrook are not just relics of the past. They are a call to awaken, to question, and to reclaim sovereignty over truth. Remember, darkness feeds on silence. Speak the truth. Demand accountability. protect the vulnerable. The legacy of 357 victims in 5 years is a reminder. Those who control death control life itself, but those who embrace truth hold the ultimate power. This is your awakening. The shadows have been lifted. Now walk forward, armed with knowledge and unshakable resolve. The story of St. Stephen's is over, but your journey toward mastery has only just begun.